Welcome to the Hero Next Door, a podcast where we feature stories of everyday heroes, great people who are just like us and might be your next door neighbor. There are heroes because of the things they do to care for the world. I'm Marilyn Fitzpatrick. I'm a psychologist, a professor emerita of counseling psychology at McGill University, and the host here of Hero Next Door. Today, our heroes are twins named Teegan and Keisha Simpson. When they recognized how they had started to curate their lives to appear the right way on Instagram, they began to see that this was an important social problem. And the twins started an initiative to help young women like themselves filter themselves less. And they called it Life Unfiltered. Commenting on Keisha and Teegan's interview today is Professor Renee Engeln from Northwestern University. She's an award-winning professor who studies body image issues and the context of social media. She's also the author of Body Sick, a book that speaks to the public about how the cultural obsession with having the right body hurts women and girls. But first, the story of Keisha and Teegan and Live Life Unfiltered.
Hello, my name is Keisha and this is Teegan, my twin sister. We are the co-founders of Live Life Unfiltered, which is a social media movement dedicated to educating young women about how social media is affecting our mental health. In university, we both felt a lot of pressure to meet society's expectations of who we should be and to kind of be a part of the culture of social media, which on average is about showing your best self and impressing people. And eventually we just realized that this was putting a lot of pressure on ourselves and it wasn't positive for our mental health. And then we got to the point where we realized it wasn't just Teegan and I, but almost all of our friends were going through the exact same thing. We're all in this environment of thinking that we need to be a certain type of individual. And so that's when we decided that we wanted to do something about it.
I remember Keisha and I are both studying abroad separately, and I was in England, she was in Ireland, and one time we met up and we were having a conversation about social media and how we were posting photos that made it look like we were having this awesome time studying abroad, which we were, but there's definitely low points in any experience. And we kind of realized how we were posting photos to make it look like we were having a lot more fun than we were. And it was a really big kind of shift in our perspective in that moment. And I think a great opportunity for us to see just how much social media was influencing the way that we kind of lived our lives.
I think when we stumbled upon like this realization that social media was really affecting us, that's when we had the idea of starting really just a project. We were just interested in starting a project at first about how social media is affecting young women. It was going to be like a Humans of New York. That was kind of the idea. Like, let's create a Humans of New York, but for women and their experiences with social media and specifically Instagram.
For us, the real first challenge was kind of figuring out how do we reach our audience in a way that best gets our message across. And ironically, we chose to go through social media, go through Instagram, because our age demographic specifically is always on social media, and why not get right to the source? So we started researching just about everything about Instagram, about body image. We weren't experts ourselves, but we wanted to become experts. We wanted to really know our audience and really know the platform itself. So months of research, a lot of knocking on people's doors, talking to experts in the field of psychology, social media, photography. Then we went right to the source and started talking with women our age about social media.
Yeah, so we created one night we invited 6 of our friends over and we told them there's a surprise. And we kind of pounced on them with this idea that we had, and we probably bombarded them a little bit with so much passion, but we got their input and we were able to use that to better align what we wanted to do with other people our age and how they would view it and just do a good job with our messaging.
That night was really important because not only did we get support from our friends and what we were doing, but we were able to see that these issues and kind of experiences that Keisha and I had were not just ours, and they are something that young women everywhere do experience. And especially seeing these people who we grew up with and we see on social media and really admire also have some of the same struggles was really really important for our own journey, and knowing that this is a real thing, this is a real issue. Our original mission with Live Life Unfiltered was to create an Instagram page that other young women could follow and really see photos and captions that they relate to. So how we conveyed this was by taking photos of young women. We'd often go up to complete strangers and just say, hey, do you want to hear about Live Life Unfiltered? And then we'd explain it to them and try and get them to take part in our photo booth and campaign. We were able to gather quotes that were honest, vulnerable, and real, and that other women could relate to. We then took an unfiltered photo, attached it to their caption, and we post them on our Instagram page.
The next step of how Live Life Unfiltered kind of transformed over time is we ran the As She Is campaign. So it started really small, and we just did it actually with our friends from high school and our friends from university. And the idea was to post an unfiltered photo on social media, and then in your caption to be really real and vulnerable, and then to tag 2 of your friends to also do the same.
We were just trying to get our friends. I mean, standing up to your peers is, again, one of the most difficult, challenging things ever. It's way tougher to be vulnerable and open to people who are close to you than it is to be with a stranger. And getting our friends, getting people we kind of knew, acquaintances, to take part in the challenge, I found personally really difficult. And then the next year, getting celebrities to take part in it. We sent thousands of emails to celebrities and influencers, trying to get them to even just get a reply, a maybe, would be fantastic. And we finally got our very first influencer. We were ecstatic. Like, it was amazing when we got that first influencer, and then the ball just started to roll. We finally started to see results from our tireless emails.
We were able to onboard over 100 women in 2019, and because they tagged 2 people, it did become quite successful, and so it did reach quite a lot of people.
It reached over 100 million people on Instagram, and 60 different countries had participants.
We've had the awesome privilege of having some really cool women from around the world join the As She Is campaign. And these were women that we didn't have any connections with, but who connected on some level to the message and probably the issue that the As She Is campaign was solving. And so some of the women that came forward and did it was Alessia Cara, Sophie Trudeau, a lot of the people from Dance Moms, The Bachelorette, there's Olympians, there's some really inspirational group of women that came together.
So many, we honestly can't pay tribute to all of them just because there were so many amazing women, some Miss Universe, and it was just really, like Keisha said, really amazing to see that these women who many of us look up to and follow on social media relate to this message, and also have days where they don't feel confident in their bodies, have days where they struggle with their mental health, and also compare themselves to other people on social media.
Throughout this entire process, we have been very open with the journey and what our next steps are. We've always just been kind of figuring it out as we go, because we don't have all the answers. But we do know that we hope that this message continues to resonate with young people, and it reaches more ears, and so that they can understand just how much better your life can be if you use social media in a way that positively benefits you. Because you don't have to be bombarded by social media. It's really up to you, and we would love for people to hear that and understand it and really improve their lives.
Ultimately, our goal and mission with Live Life Unfiltered is to help people recognize the way we filter ourselves in our everyday lives. So whether it's the way we filter ourselves at work, with our families and our relationships, you don't have to be a young woman to be struggling with your body or the way you represent yourself to the world. We filter our lives in every aspect of who we are, and I think this message can be taken in so many different levels across various parts of our lives.
We've definitely been impacted by Live Life Unfiltered and just the experience of also getting to have so many more conversations about these issues. So we started this as girls that were struggling with our body image, right? Like we weren't professionals doing it. We were very much our target audience. And so as a result, we were fighting our own battles during this process. The advice that we would give to someone who wants to go and do something for other people is to just do it. There's nothing stopping you, and I think probably the thing that is going to be the biggest obstacle that you face is yourself. It's your own brain. It's the voice in your head that's telling you that you can't do it. And so our advice would be to just kind of dig in and do it. Put your head down and keep going. So stop thinking, stop doubting yourself, just go do it.
Ask for help. This movement would have been absolutely nothing without the help of others. There was a whole team of young women, advisors, professors, people who helped us really get this movement off the ground and running. Asking for help is so important because you're not going to know all the answers, you're not going to have the resources, and people have knowledge and resources that they're willing and wanting to give to you. You just have to ask for it.
Get your team of people to help you out and have fun while you're doing it.
I find Teegan and Keisha's understanding of the impact of social media and their desire to help young women inspiring, and the idea of filtering themselves less as thoughtful and intriguing. Joining me to elaborate on that and give us an expert perspective is Professor Renee Engeln from Northwestern University. Renee, did I pronounce that correctly?
You did.
Renee studies issues surrounding women's body images, particularly how culture and social media reinforce the difficult relationship women have with their bodies. In addition to her academic research, Dr. Engeln has written a book, Beauty Sick, that helps readers understand why they relate to their appearance the way they do, and a little bit about how to change that. She's a frequent contributor to Psychology Today. She's been interviewed on national media and gives frequent talks on image issues. Welcome, Renee.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. I'm so glad you could join us today. I wondered if a place for us to start might be just you giving us your perspective of how young women come to be so concerned with their appearance. How do we get this way? What's happening in the world, both historically and today, that pushes that forward?
That's a big question, but an important one. It's a long road. The thing I always want people to think about when we say, why are women so concerned with their appearance? Is that it's not women's fault. This isn't some sort of internal failing. Being worried about how you look as a woman is a completely natural response to the waters we're swimming in. Right? We still live in a culture today where women's primary form of social currency is how they look. Right? It's emphasized, it's focused on sometimes to the exclusion of anything else women want to be or anything else women are. So of course you're going to worry about it. Now it's complicated too, how we got here. I do think evolution played a role, right? There are certainly some, selection pressures that sort of shaped us to be attentive to appearance in general, to notice it, to process it quickly. But we have never lived in a culture like the one we're living in today in terms of the amount and intensity of focus on how women look. The media environment has ramped up the focus in ways that are difficult to really even get our heads around, the way that this is affecting young women. But I think we're starting to see real empirical evidence of these effects. Media imagery and concerns about appearance aren't the only thing affecting young women's mental health, but I can tell you every time we get a new set of survey data out showing the ways that young women are struggling with anxiety and depression, it's hard not to think this plays a role.
And 30 years ago, we had magazines, we had billboards, we certainly had media, but we did not have this thing that we carry around in our hand where we are kind of constantly attached to images out there in the world. You've studied social media, right?
Right. But when I started, there was no social media. So I've been doing this for a long time now. I'm 47 years old now. So I had the privilege really of growing up without social media.
Yeah.
And I think about that a lot. So when I started studying women and media images of women, we were looking at Vogue and Cosmo, the print magazines, like actual print magazines, are thinking about things like 90210 and Melrose Place and all of these things that will not even make sense probably to some of your listeners. And now I look back and that seems quaint, right? The idea that we were worried about that influence, given the floodgates that were opened when especially photo and video driven social media took over.
Right, right. And can you give us your insight into what happens to people when they become aware of this? So Keegan and Keisha and Teegan, excuse me, they started to talk to one another about this, and then they started to talk to their friends about this. Do you think that most people are aware of this?
I think that we're aware, right? But I think that a lot of people feel powerless. I have had many young women say things to me like, social media is ruining my life and I can't stop using it. I just
Mhm.
can't, right? So, on some level that it hurts, but just because you're aware that something's hurting you doesn't mean you want to stop doing it, because social
Mhm.
media is also fun and it's also a way to connect with people and it's a good distraction, and animal videos, who doesn't like that, right? So there are good reasons that people want to be on social media and be spending their time engaging with it. And I think it's hard to give up even when it feels like it's hurting you. And in that
Mhm.
way, maybe it's no different than those old-fashioned magazines were, where you knew you felt awful when you looked at them, but you still wanted it, right? There are these images that we want to see, even when they feel like a knife through our heart. We can't stop looking. And I think that's part of a really fundamental human drive to know how we stack up, right? We like to see, how do we compare to other people? And when you see someone who looks really attractive, your instinct is to look again. And then it's almost impossible not to take that next step, which
Yeah.
is, where do I fall relative to that person? And when it comes to the kind of images you see mostly on social media, you're going to lose in that comparison. You're going to fall short.
Is that because those images are so curated?
It's because they're curated, right? They're carefully selected from many, many, many options of
Mhm.
images that person probably took, but
Mhm.
they're also carefully posed, the lighting, the background, everything. They are filtered, they are touched up, right? People do everything they can to make that image look as perfect as possible. And why wouldn't they? Because it
Mhm.
seems like everyone else is doing it, right? You don't want to be the one who actually has pores when you post a picture of yourself. If it seems like
Oh
nobody else
God, no,
does,
not
no
pores.
pores, right? And nobody wants to look unattractive in a picture, right? Like we can all do that. When you pose for a picture, like you try to stand up straight and look nice and do your face. So like it's normal, but what's happened is it's gotten turned up because the tools that people can use now to alter how they look in these images used to only be available to professionals.
Mhm.
And I think in a way that was good, because it made this firm boundary where you could look at models and celebrities and say, that's not real, right?
Okay.
They've got a team of professionals helping them look that way. It's airbrushed, it's touched up. It doesn't have that much to do with me and my friends. But now all of your friends look like that too.
Mhm.
And I think it's so common, it's so overwhelming that I think it's really easy to lose track of what people look like in real
Okay.
life.
Yes.
You really forget that people don't all have giant eyes and sunken cheekbones and perfectly smooth skin and perfectly white teeth, and that's not how human features work.
Okay. And that takes us to Tegan and Keisha's idea of living life unfiltered. Can you talk about, is that possible? Like
Is
what?
it possible? I don't know if it's possible to live all of your life unfiltered.
Yes.
But what I really try to do is encourage young people, and particularly young women, to increase their number of unfiltered moments or minutes. The term I usually use when I'm talking about this is performance.
Okay.
Everyone has times when they have to perform.
Yes.
I'm performing a little bit right now. Like I'm standing up straighter. I cleaned up my office, but only the area right behind the camera. Right? We all perform in little ways, of course. But whenever you're performing, you're not being entirely authentic. And that's exhausting, and it can make you feel kind of disconnected from who you are. And so I think the idea of living life unfiltered, to me, suggests having more moments where you're not performing, where you're not on. And how do you do that? I think you mostly do that by finding people who accept you as you are. Because those are the kind of people where you wouldn't even bother performing, because they love you no matter what. You don't need to look a certain way. You don't need to have a certain kind of home or office, or you can just be. And so if those spaces can be created online to some extent, I'm all for it.
Okay. What happens to, well, young women in particular, but I don't think only young women are immune or are susceptible to this. I think it's very hard for any of us to be immune. But what happens when we buy into these images? What happens to our mental health? What happens to our physical health? What happens to us?
I think so many young people, and young women in particular, already struggle with the sense that they are not good enough, right? That they're never going to be good enough. And that can hit multiple domains. It can be in terms of academics or your relationship success, but it can often be about how you look, that it's just never enough. That is a terrible feeling when you feel like you're falling short all the time. And it's so unfair, because the standard you're being compared to was one you were never meant to meet, right? No one's ever meant to look that perfect. You're just meant to feel bad about it and buy stuff, right, to help get you there. So that feeling of falling short, it can feed depression, anxiety. When it's centered on the body and weight and appearance, it can, of course, contribute to eating disorders. Now, all of those are complex issues that are not caused just by social media, of course. But absolutely, that kind of imagery, that kind of filtering plays a role in just making you feel like you're not enough. That's a terrible feeling that too many people are walking around with. And I love hearing about young people who are trying to lift that burden a little bit for others.
You had done some research, I know, in what you call talking back to body image. Can you just tell us what that is, first of all, and what you found?
Yeah. So what I mean when I say that is basically media literacy. So processing the images you see in media more critically.
Okay.
One of the things we were interested in my lab was the extent to which women were already doing that. When they saw this sort of perfect image, were they already being a little critical? Did they know it wasn't real? Did they know it was filtered or photoshopped or edited in one way or another? And did it help to know that? What we find is kind of disappointing. The good news is people know, right? This goes back to probably the 90s, early 2000s, when we had a lot of television shows that were exposing the kind of tricks that are used in photo images. And so people know the images aren't real. That's the good news. The bad news is knowing that doesn't really seem to help that much. When I first started out doing research in this field, I really believed that if we could just get women to be more critical of the images they saw, that would sort of put up this protective barrier. You could dismiss the images and they wouldn't be such a psychological punch every time you saw them. It doesn't end up that that's true, because that comparison process we talked about is so automatic. What happens is you look at that perfect image, you think, oh, I don't look like that. And then you think, but that's fake. But I still wish I looked like that, right? That's sort of the thing you go through. And so I really like this idea of just having fewer of those filtered images. I also like the idea, which is just different, of just having fewer images all together. one of the things I do now, I'm older, maybe I can get away with this more, is I just try not to be in pictures very much. I don't spend time taking my picture, posting my picture.
Yes.
Now I know some people have to for their jobs or whatever, they think it's fun. But I actually think every time you take a picture of yourself and put it out there in the public, you're opening the door for appearance concerns to get sort of ratcheted up. And
Okay.
one way to avoid those is just to opt out.
Okay.
But if you can't opt out, seeing what actual human people look like in your feed is a pretty good alternative.
So kind of like a picture diet, right? I'm going to go on a picture diet. I'm going to
Yeah.
take a lot less photos of myself and certainly post less photos of myself.
Yeah, it's been really nice for me to do that. I mean, I was never a huge poster, but like I study this for a living, and still, if I had to put a picture of myself up for some reason, it immediately starts you thinking like, oh, is this okay? Is that okay? Like, how does this look? How are people going to see this?
Yes.
It's so refreshing just to not engage with it. So sometimes when people say, oh, can I take a picture? I'll just say, no, thanks. And people will, what do you mean, no,
What?
thanks?
Yeah.
The thing I will do though, when students, I don't know if you know about Be Real, the thing. So, okay, I don't even know how to explain it well. But if the Be Real timer goes off or whatever they call it when I'm around, I love to be in students' Be Real pictures. And I love seeing how they pose for those pictures. There's a joy in those pictures that you do not see in the carefully curated stuff. Like
Okay.
instead of making this face that's like, I'm so sexy, instead they just go and they make these faces of like joy, delight, and like just sort of letting themselves go. And I think that's really fun. If we saw more of those pictures online, that'd be a pretty cool world.
It'd be an interesting thing to study.
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of the impact of posing versus the impact of showing joy, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there can be a joy in sharing your current moment with other people. Like that's part of what's so compelling about social media. But when we do it so carefully and in such a filtered way, what are we really sharing, right? We're not really sharing ourselves. We're sharing an image of ourselves that doesn't relate to who we actually are. So I like the idea of sharing your real self whenever possible, whenever you're safely able to do so.
You also, I think, have an idea of form versus function in terms of body. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So one of the things my lab has been doing forever is trying to hit on things that might actually help. We study a lot of negative things, right? Things that make
Yes.
you feel worse. And there's been a lot of research in recent years from a number of different labs, looking at how thinking of your body as a doing thing, as an experiencing thing, can really help you feel better about it. And that's as opposed to thinking of it as something for people to look at. So instead of thinking about how your body looks to others, you're thinking about how it feels to you and what you do with it. That's the function part. Sometimes people push back and they'll say, oh, that's ableist because not everyone has the same functions. But that's not really what it's about. It's not about, your body has to run a marathon in order to be able to appreciate it. Although if it does, that's cool. I hope you appreciate it. But it's about inhabiting your body with subjectivity, right? It's even if you're not an athlete, even if you have a disability or you're in chronic pain, right? There are still beautiful things your body gives you. It's what lets you hug and communicate and move around, right? It does all these great things. And we can really lose touch with that if we're constantly thinking, how does it look to other people?
Yeah. Yeah. I read about and like the idea of kind of instead of thinking about my belly as too round or not flat enough, to think about it as the place where I digest the nutrients that keep me going, that allow me to sit here and talk to you today.
And I love thinking about, I hear so many women complain about their arms, always with the upper arms. And I think it really helps me to think about like those arms are for hugging the people you love.
That's a great idea.
And it's not that this is going to make you not care about how you look, right? We're always going to care about how we look. It's normal. But the idea is to turn it down so that it's not the only thing we care about, or so that we don't care about it so much that we lose touch with the other parts of ourselves. That's that's what really worries me. When you're performing attractiveness for other people all the time, you don't get to nurture the parts of yourself that probably matter to you a lot more than how you look.
Okay. Yeah. And I guess there's also an idea in here of, so when you talk about how many women have these kinds of thoughts, obsessions even, and how frequent they are in their lives, one of the things that we can certainly know is that if I am torturing myself in this way at this moment, I am in the company of many, many, many other women, which is a self-compassion strategy. And I know you've worked a little bit on self-compassion as well.
Right. I think it always helps to know when you're hurting that other people are hurting too, that you're not alone in it. Not because you want others to hurt, of course, but because it reminds you that what you're going through is very human. It doesn't, I hear too many young people talk about themselves as though they are fundamentally broken, right? That
Mhm.
they're the way they hurt emotionally, it just means that they're broken. And I think knowing that other people are feeling the same thing is a reminder that you're not broken, right? You're living in a culture that does not serve you well, and it hurts sometimes when that happens.
Sure does.
And everybody hurts that way sometimes. And I think especially for a lot of high achieving young people who are used to just sort of always giving that impression of having their act together, right? Everything's fine, everything's perfect. I think there's something really powerful to being able to see other people for what's really going on in their lives and how they're really feeling. I hear students all the time say, everyone else knows what they're doing with their life. Everyone else is doing fine in their classes. There's always part of me that's like, no, that's like definitely not true. And this isn't just a pep talk. This is just facts, right? It's not
Yes.
true.
Yes.
Nobody's got it all figured out. And there's real comfort in knowing that you're on the journey with other people who feel like you do. I think it can help you connect to people more authentically when you know that.
That's a really nice idea. I work as a psychologist, so I talk to people. I hear about the kinds of issues that you're talking about often. Do you have suggestions for people who work with other people, whether it's as a teacher or a coach or a psychologist or a therapist? How to talk to people about their bodies, or should we not be talking to people about their bodies? Is that a mistake?
It's a little counterintuitive, but I think to some extent we would benefit by less body talk in general.
Okay.
I think people lean into this like, well, you're beautiful the way you are. Everyone's beautiful the way you are. And if that worked, that'd be great. And we'd all go around feeling beautiful all the time.
Yeah.
But that doesn't actually work. It doesn't work when you don't feel it, but it also doesn't work when the world around you isn't treating you as though you're beautiful. People have different experiences in this world as a result of how they look. We can't pretend like that's not happening.
Yes.
So I think one gift you can give people is to help them build other parts of their lives that aren't about how they look. And one way to do that is just have different conversations.
Mhm.
To sort of create a little microculture for yourself that just says, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about how we look, how other people look. It's not that it's completely out of bounds. We're humans, right? It happens.
Mhm.
But there are other things we can focus on that are probably more interesting. Now, I don't think you want to be punitive. Stop talking about how you look. We don't do that here, right? Like that's not nice. That's pretty invalidating. But part of what I'm advocating for is a shift to really asking, in particular, young people better questions.
Mhm.
Right? Like there's this tendency, particularly when you see a young woman, to just immediately compliment how she looks. Immediately, right? It's instinct. Even young girls, this happens.
Yes. Mhm.
And it happens with older women too, where the first thing you say is something about someone's outfit or their hair, and and immediately that turns everyone to thinking about appearance. When it's not too hard, you're a psychologist, so you know this, to ask a nice open-ended question instead, right? A question that opens the door to really meaningful conversations where you can learn something about someone, or where you can affirm a part of them that's not related to how they look. Young people want to talk about their values, right? They want
Mhm.
to talk about what they're passionate about and what matters to them. The more we create spaces where that's happening, the less worried they're going to be about how they look.
That's actually what we're trying to do on Hero Next Door. We're trying to point people toward a conversation about values, which is a diametrically opposed idea to appearance and those kinds of values. So the caring values tend to have the opposite impacts to the ones you're talking about: less anxiety, less depression, more sense of satisfaction with life.
There's an issue with social media where it's supposed to be about you connecting with other people, but I think it too often ends up being you, right? This is me. This is how I look. This is what I want. This is what I'm saying. And actually, a way to feel better in the world is to focus on your connections with other people more, right? To do more listening, more relating to others in a meaningful way. I always tell my students, like, if they're really struggling, if they're just in like a terrible, terrible mood, they feel awful that day, one of the most powerful things they can do is just do something kind for someone else. You know, send someone a quick text to let them know they're thinking about them and appreciate them. Like little things like that can make a big difference. But I think we've gotten self-care too wrapped up in looking cute, right? Of course we should take care of ourselves, right? Of course we need to care for ourselves. But it doesn't have to involve a mirror at all. And one of the most important ways you can care for yourself is by connecting with the people you love, right? By making time for them and reaching out to them, or it's by nurturing a passion you have, or by taking care of your brain by learning something interesting or new skill, or, you know, stretching yourself intellectually. That's also a way of taking care of yourself. It doesn't have to be about a 12 or 15 or 8 million step skincare routine or whatever it is people are on now.
Yeah. Oh, that's a wonderful idea. I think that's very important, because it's certainly the one factor that tends to show up all the time when we look at people who thrive, is that they have good social connections, they have relationships. And to a certain extent, as Teegan and Keisha were talking about, they're vulnerable.
Right.
Because that's what it means to be close. You can't, it's
Right.
really hard to be
Right.
close to someone if they don't know what's inside me.
Right. Self-disclosure, I mean, in the right context, right? In the right way, can be such a powerful way to connect with other people. And you're automatically putting a mask up when you filter and edit and show a version of your life that isn't real. It's the opposite of self-disclosure. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love
appreciate your
hearing
time.
about and talking about young people who want to make the world a little better place. They're the joy of my life, really.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Heroes Next Door, and that the words of our heroes, Keisha and Teegan, and the insights of Dr. Engeln have given you lots of ideas to understand and to help people who struggle to be well with their bodies. Please help us to continue our work by subscribing to Hero Next Door on Spotify or Google or YouTube, and join us again soon. I'm Marilyn Fitzpatrick for Hero Next Door.